Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is Morning Sam, Morning Ralph, the podcast for restaurant technology professionals. And I am joined here today with Scott Bartley, who is a professional graphic designer, an artist, and a longtime ad agency guy based in New York City, Madison Avenue, with Bartley as a partner with Bartley and Dick. Well, I've known Scott for a long time. He's worked with incredible brands ranging from Amazon to Microsoft to really cool organizations like the Jackie Robinson Foundation. And what we're going to talk about today is fundamentally about design. And I don't know if you know this, but did you know like the secret sauce behind the brands you love often lies in three ingredients, right? You have a strong concept, you have this unexpected execution, and then you really have this relentless attention to detail over time. So, with that in mind, Scott Bartley, welcome to the show, man. It's awesome to have you and see you again.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate you having me here. This is awesome.
You know, I've been a big fan of yours for a very long time. I'm familiar with your work, and we will and don't worry for the listeners out there. I will put some links in the show description so you can check out Scott's stuff. But Scott has this philosophy that he believes that, and he shared this with me earlier. Great design is kind of like a cornerstone in connecting with customers and creating lasting impressions. It's not just about the words you say, which should always aim for the heart, but you should also create visuals that support whatever the messaging is that you're trying to say. So, with that, Scott, tell me a little bit about your philosophy on design. The strong concept, unexpected execution, attention to detail. What do you mean by that framework?
Yeah, no, great question. So, my first job when I was out of college, my professors in school told me get yourself a really good mentor because it'll set you up for success for the rest of your career. So, my first mentor was a man named Ralph DeCoco, and he said to me the first day that I started to work with him, he said, "Concept, concept, concept. Concept is
Mm.
everything. If you don't have a concept, you don't have a design." And he drilled that into my head at a very young age, and 30 something years later I still have that philosophy. Like, every design execution has to have a really strong concept, and then that concept is what kind of pulls you through to all the various touch points, and it brings you back. So that's how people remember you, is by having a really strong concept. So
So when you say concept, is that just like the big idea
yeah,
or okay,
exactly, having like a big idea that can thread through all of your communication touch points.
okay. So, you think about things in everyday life that we can look to as being strong executors on a strong concept. Um, okay. Well, let's go back to that for a second because I want to pull together these other elements and then we can talk about perhaps examples that pull these three pillars together. So we have a strong concept. Next thing you like to talk about is an unexpected execution. What do you mean by that?
So there's a lot of different ways to tell a story, and people love stories. And execution is sort of the way that I look at that, is like, it's how are we communicating that story in a way that's a little bit unexpected. If you're somebody that's, if you're the strongest man in the world, just saying I'm the strongest man in the world is one approach, but there's other ways of doing that as well. You could talk about having an execution where you show somebody like ripping a phone book in half, or somebody, it's kind of like, how do you communicate that idea in a way that's going to resonate with the audience that they didn't necessarily expect, so it grabs their attention and then they remember it.
I love that. So, okay. So that unexpected that it's kind of like the twist, right? It's a little bit of a twist.
Yeah. And it's why
And
we
then
love
you
commercials so much. It's like, when you see a really great commercial, you remember it because it's so clever. The unexpected execution could be kind of, it's the cleverness of what, like, I didn't expect that, but wow, what a great way to make me remember something that I would never ever have thought of.
I love that. And so the third pillar is this attention to detail. So we have a strong concept, an unexpected execution, and attention to detail.
Yeah.
All right. So I would assume, anybody is going to But what do you mean by attention to detail? Because of course they're paying attention to the details.
Yeah, so I'm talking about when from the creative side, the attention to detail is following through. So just going back to my mentor, one of the first projects we worked on together was an album. This was like an actual vinyl album years and years ago. And he showed me another album done by the same artist. And on the front of the album, it looked amazing. On the back of the album, it was
Yeah,
just there was nothing there, nothing that connected to the front. And he said attention to detail matters. If you have a good concept, it should go from the cover to the back cover to the inside to the sleeve to,
yeah,
I mean, this is like, this is like 30 years ago, but like the whole idea was that those details matter. Don't ever take any bit of that canvas for granted. Everything
yeah.
should be connected and everything should be really well thought through.
All right. So just as a side note here, right? Because let's just talk about album art for a second. Because is this not like the quintessential, like the best possible scenario that you can have for a creative or a designer is here's an album that you get to design. You have the band, right? The band may have they may have their album may have a concept to it in which you want to tie back to the cover, in which you may want to execute to the liner notes. And even like the label itself, you have all of these different elements in which you can bring design into the equation to elevate the entire experience.
Yep.
One of my mentors was this gentleman who I think about often. His name was Neil Turk, and he was kind of a legend actually in the consumer electronics industry. But before that, he made his bones as a designer on in New York, and he worked for a while actually at Chess Records,
Oh, cool.
and then he worked for other labels as well. And one day he shared with me that here's an album cover that I designed. And at the time I was like, well, that's a shitty looking album cover. But then as I got older and I really looked at it, and it's basically Dire Straits. Dire
Oh,
Straits album cover. Jeez, the name of it now it's eluding me, but it's the one with Romeo and Juliet. It's the red album cover with a
yep.
blue. It looks like a red folder with a blue side, and it just says Dire Straits something,
Nice.
and it's like they approve that. But you
Sometimes
look
less is
at it
more.
today, and it's like it's freaking brilliant,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and it stands up.
Yep. Less is more sometimes.
Oh my god! But yeah, so let's go back for a second. Just talk about all right. We got a concept. We got an unexpected execution and an attention. Like, give me an example of some maybe an inspiring brand that really follows through with that.
Yeah, definitely. So like I started out my career as a designer, as a graphic designer, and then I very quickly moved into advertising. So I am a I'm an ad guy through and through. I've worked at multiple ad agencies before I started my own. And I still I have the same love for advertising as I did when I first got into the business. I love a good ad. And I think one of the best brands out there for doing great ads is Snickers.
Mm,
So if you've ever seen the Snickers "You're Not Yourself When You're Hungry" campaign,
yeah,
that is such a brilliant, just a brilliant ad campaign because it's unexpected, but it sells something, but it makes you remember it and it doesn't feel like it's selling to you. And the old tagline for Snickers used to be Snickers really satisfies.
right.
Packed with peanuts, Snickers really satisfies. And now they've evolved that. It's the same idea, but they've evolved it, made it a little bit more unexpected. And they say, "You're not yourself when you're hungry." So they just kind of like they evolved the brand. And back when it was Snickers really satisfies, the original Snickers was used as a meal replacement during
World War II or something.
yeah, like during like the Great Depression when people needed to have like a cheap meal
Oh,
replacement.
wow.
So they talked about being full of peanuts and protein, and it would be like a good meal replacement. So the brand has evolved over the past 100 years, but they've gotten just a little bit more interesting and a little bit more interesting. And then when you start to think about the unexpected execution, I mean, the commercials for the TV spots for Snickers are just fantastic. Like the Abe Kubota and Betty
Betty
White
White, right?
playing football. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? It's just like you know, how can you not remember those commercials? You're not yourself when you're hungry. Getting hangry. Everybody can identify with what that's
right.
like, but not everybody's thinking about a Snickers bar as like a way to solve that problem. So I love, and I also personally love humor in advertising. I think it's like we're kind of invading a little bit on people's time. They're watching something else, and then we're kind of like a disruptor in the middle
Right.
of that programming. So you want to give them something that they're going to enjoy, not just selling to, but you want them to feel a part of it, something that they're excited about.
Well, I totally get it, right? So they have so here's Snickers, right? Is a longtime brand that has stayed with this extremely strong concept of satisfying hunger. I mean, from Jump Street, that's kind of what they hung their hat on,
Yep.
and they've continued to evolve that messaging. And I think in some ways that perhaps is how they pay attention to detail. They have a strong concept, but they're meticulous in honing that message, to modernizing it, to really paying attention to the way people speak and the way people act and what trends are happening, where that's the attention to detail and all the unexpected twists and turns. Those are the emotional connections that really bring you into the whole promise and experience.
And it's one of those things too where it's like, I remember this quote. I forget who said it, but it was like, remember the old telephone ads that used to say, like, if the ad was just being direct, it would be pick up the phone and call somebody long distance.
Yeah.
That's the message. But what they said was reach out and touch someone. So it was like, what the actual literal was, the unexpected execution was to be able to take that idea, pick up the phone and call somebody long distance, but we say reach out and touch someone, and it's a little bit unexpected, it's a little bit more memorable, it's a little bit more emotional. And I think that's what makes a great ad.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it is that emotion, and I alluded to it in a comment that I had made, where good design, good communication really aims for the heart, not just not the eyes, right? Like, so you can make something absolutely beautiful, and you may actually make something that's so beautiful that it does create this emotional resonance. But generally speaking, copy, you could put more weight on the copy and the messaging than on the design or the packaging itself. That's what can really sort of tug on the emotional strings, can make people laugh, can make people cry.
Yep.
You know, so with that, like, Scott, in our space, particularly in the restaurant technology side, we have a lot of startups. I mean, there are more, and I know you know this because we talked about this in the past in different conversation, but there are literally thousands and thousands of restaurant tech companies out there now. And with AI, there seems to be more of these popping up on a daily basis. How can some of these smaller brands prioritize design and messaging and really the packaging of their brand to tell a great story without these gazillion-dollar budgets like a Snickers?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a great idea doesn't have to. I mean, sometimes it's nice to have it cost something, but a great idea can come from anywhere. And that's the thing. It's like you gotta take your idea and you gotta kind of really look at it and say, is this as strong as it can be? And one of the other things that we do quite a bit is we say, how do we make it? How do we simplify it? If it's complicated, it's not going to work. You got to simplify your messaging down to a very specific core message, then build it back up from there. And I think I wanted to make a point. Not only is design great in the visual world and in the communication world, but design is great just for brands in general. Like, for example, I always think about Warby Parker. I don't know if you've ever been to a Warby Parker,
Yeah.
but the user experience there, when you sign up for your appointment to when you show up at the place, they're waiting for you, the eye exam, the whole process is so well thought out. It's every part of that process is designed. And what that does is that gives you like a feeling when you're done, because typically getting your eyeglasses can be not the most pleasant experience. There's
Mm.
nothing, it's just sort of a commodity in a way. What Warby Parker did was they made it an experience that I'm talking about it right now. I've never talked about an eyeglass experience in my entire life, and it's the details matter. So you don't necessarily have to have a huge budget in order to have a great concept and a great design, but you just need to spend some time thinking about it and really understanding what is it that makes me different? What do we want our customers to experience? What do we want them to feel? And then how do we make those two how do we bring those two things together?
Right. And And I love what you're saying though about design. When you say design, I kind of get the sense that it's all a design. It's like a grand design,
Everything
right?
is designed, yeah.
It's the grand, marketing and branding in some ways is sort of this grand complication where you and that's like the highbrow marketing, okay, marketing jackass, whatever,
Right.
keep going.
Yeah.
But but the reality is that for marketing professionals and people that take branding very seriously and take the customer experience very seriously, it is an art form. It is an art. And yeah, of course there's science, but the science should help you, should inform some of your decision making, but it shouldn't be the thing you hang your gut on. I mean, you need to go with what it means to be a human, and your brand better than anybody, right? So science is great to help inform, and it's great to help measure results so that you can change some things if things are not working. But design is, I think, more art than science. One of the things, I'm just looking at on my show notes, and what do you think some of the common pitfalls are in branding? Right. So we talk a little bit about companies need to pay closer attention to design and the way that they present themselves. What are some ways in which brands could fail quite easily?
Yeah, well, one of the things that's really sometimes you could be too close to a brand,
Mm,
especially when we're working with with founders. They think a certain way and they think about their product a certain way, and we find this quite a bit in the food business, the food and beverage industry. Is we're sometimes we're dealing with scientists, sometimes we're dealing with R&D guys, and they're very methodical in the way that they think about their product or their service. And what we do is we come in and we say, how do we add a little bit of emotion into it? So sometimes you could be a little too literal, and you
yeah.
could be a little too, and then you become sort of vanilla. You become a little bit boring. There's nothing to remember. It's just, you're just spewing facts. So I think it's really interesting to have a great combination of somebody who's got a business sense and somebody who's got that marketing creative sense to come together. And a good creative director will explain to the client why this execution or this approach is taking your knowledge and what makes you different, but is putting a spin on it that makes it a little bit more memorable and a little bit more distinguishable from everybody else. Because sometimes, not always, but sometimes brands all do exactly the same thing. Coca-Cola and Pepsi are very similar,
Yeah.
but they're clearly branded differently, and the way that they talk to their audiences are clearly different. But the product that they make, for the most part, they're indistinguishable between them. So I think getting too like being too close to your own product or service can sometimes, not always, but sometimes can be a detriment. And then also thinking that, you brought it up earlier, which is so true. We're logical beings, but we are emotional beings as well. And if you have logic without emotion, it's not going to be as successful as if you have logic paired with emotion and then
Right.
a really awesome execution.
Let's talk about that because I think there's a bit of a trend nowadays to, I sometimes I see these modern websites, the modern sites, they've taken Bauhaus like to the nth degree where everything is black and white and sort of it, and I feel like that has been done to the point where I, I don't know. It's just it feels soulless.
Yep.
And I feel like it looks cool, and people can get drawn into like I want to be cool and slick and and slim and lightweight and ethereal and everything like that. But by going down a road like that, I mean there are traps involved, right?
Absolutely. Going back to my mentor again, I didn't even know I was going to be talking about this, but he said to me, besides concept is everything, he used to say to me, never design anything for design's sake. It needs to communicate a feeling or a benefit or something like that. And I agree, there's a lot of sites or a lot of design out there that's very designed, but
Yeah,
it's kind of trendy. It's like,
yeah,
design trends come and go, but strong conceptual messaging that's what you can hang. That's timeless. And
Yeah.
like, you can look at, color palettes from the 90s, like teal and purple, and whatever. There was like, there were just some things that were going on back then, and you look at them and they look dated. But a
Right.
great concept, like the Snickers, it just evolves over time and it gets stronger and it gets better. So that's another good trap to not fall into. Don't don't lean into trends, because trends come and go. Lean
Yeah.
into solid conceptual communication, and then you'll be relevant. You might need to update some things over time, but if your core messaging is in that column, you will be relevant for years to
Yeah.
come.
And I think that's great advice. And even and I think this is especially true for B2B companies. Right? B2B companies tend to, let's face it, they try to be somewhat innocuous, and they don't want to be offensive in any way, and they just want to make sure that they're striking right down the middle, right? This so you'll often get these very stark, very black and white, very, maybe a streak of color here or there, but they all kind of look the same. It feels templated. It doesn't feel like it has a soul.
Right.
But it is, I mean, the reality is that it is rather timeless. I mean, it's not offensive. You know, and I just got to wonder how much of a disservice I think that these companies are doing to themselves by not exploring really what makes their brand shine and what makes themselves different, right?
It's a total disservice. And what's interesting, what I always think about is B2B. I used to be a creative director at a B2B agency for a while. So
Mm.
I worked just in the B2B space, and I had some great mentors there as well. This was when I first moved to New York. But I remember that, you know, consumers are consumers. So the B2B customer has a longer sales funnel. It's a longer time to consider a purchase. It's usually a much bigger purchase. But what we forget is that person that's making that B2B decision is also going out and buying a pair of Nike sneakers. And they're also going out and they're choosing a phone company. And so you're not dealing with a robot who has only B2B blinders on. They're
Right.
used to seeing other commercials, and they're used to being marketed to. And if everybody kind of was doing the same thing, then all of a sudden there's no differentiation. And there's some fantastic brands in the B2B space that really lean into what is it that makes them unique and different.
Yeah.
And then they take that and they carry that through to all those various touch points, so that people don't say, "What was the name of that company again?" They remember the company because it's distinctive and it's unique.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to offend anybody, but it's not about offending somebody.
Yeah.
It's about, how do you stand out? It's like going for a job interview. If your resume looks like the resume of every other person that's interviewing for that job, you might as well all be wearing the same gray suit. Nobody's gonna stand out. But if somebody's, a little bit different, you want to rise above and kind of break through that sea of sameness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important, and I love how you brought up that the concept that a buyer is a person, right? I mean, they don't automatically, once they start shopping for B2B purchases, all of a sudden they turn into some, freaking android or something.
Exactly.
They're still that same person with the same hopes and dreams and aspirations as anybody else.
Right.
You know, you brought something up about implementing a design across all the different touch points. And, you know, that's we like in the graphic design space, we like to call that design as a system,
Mhm.
right? How important is design as a system to the average company, to any company? Explain to me, what does that mean? Is when you create this system, is it unbreakable?
No. So great. That's a great question. But having a design system and having an integrated concept, so that when you look at your social feeds and you look at your website and you look at your any of your marketing materials, you look at your emails, there should be there's very easy brand confusion. There's a lot of brands that do similar things, and if you start to see them overlap, if marketing in general is expensive, so you want to make sure you do it right. So avoid those pitfalls early on. But imagine seeing a billboard for Coca-Cola, and it was bright green. you would be like, what is that? That doesn't make any sense. It's like,
Right.
there's so much equity in those elements, whether it be color or typography or tone of voice or any of those things. And the key is to be able to take whatever it is that you establish as your brand platform and then say, okay, here's my brand guides. And they're guides. They're not, they're guardrails, because you don't want to be, you want to have the flexibility to do things that are a little bit different. And when opportunities come up and you want to try something that's a little bit more out there or something
Yeah.
that's a little bit more tailored, but you stay within those guides so that they know it's coming from your brand. For example, we do a lot of work with the BBC, and the BBC is a well-established brand, been around a long time. They've got brand guides, but we have a lot of liberties within those brand guides. We've worked with other companies in the past that have brand guides, and they're like, they lay out everything.
They're
Like,
like
this is,
500-page long,
yeah,
and it's like, really,
yeah.
really.
Every page needs to be laid out exactly like that, and it's just like, oh, you can be too consistent.
Oh,
You want to
we
be
believe
just,
me. And then trying to, and then we see that all the time, particularly on the partnership side when you work with these larger. Well, I won't name names, Microsoft, but you can't. There's nothing that you can do without. I mean, it is,
you're kind
and
of almost like shackled.
it's like completely shackled, and you wonder why Microsoft comes across as the most stalest. I shouldn't say that. I'm sorry. I'll probably cut that out. No, I'm not. But unshackle, unshackle. Come on.
Right. They're not known for their innovation like Apple is. Apple is talking to a specific audience. All of Apple's marketing, all of their branding really aligns with the belief system of who they're speaking to.
Yeah.
And like that's why people love Apple as a brand. That's why, like I'm buying an iPhone. I'm not buying a cell phone. I'm not buying a smartphone. I'm buying an iPhone. So you got to, you want to create brand loyalists. That's the biggest thing, is like if you can build your tribe of brand loyalists that only want your brand, man, that's where you want to spend your money, because that then there is no second choice. Like I only drink, I'm just making this up. I don't do this, but like I only drink Diet Coke, and like I'm not. If Diet Pepsi, no thanks. It's not for me. Like I have these brands that I'm attached to,
Yeah.
but it takes time to build those connections over time.
Well, it
So,
goes back to we love on this show, we're all kind of like Simon Sinek disciples, right? And his big thing of why. Well, you have to understand why. Why do you exist?
yep,
You know, for the iPhone, for example, we buy an iPhone not because it's a cell phone, but we buy why it's an iPhone.
yep,
We buy the why behind it, not necessarily the commodity that it is.
correct.
You know, all right. This has been an awesome conversation. I want to get to this segment because it's important that I do so I can keep up my streak. Hate to tell you, but is this time of my little podcast here where I get to ask you what your hate to tell you but is in design, and that's bust a myth for me about design.
Yep. So I hate to tell you this, but your logo doesn't need to be bigger. If your logo is this big on a screen or if it's this big on a screen, it's not going to matter. It's what people feel. So nobody is buying a product or a company or a service off of the size of the logo, but you can look horsey. And sometimes when things are too big, all of a sudden that level of sophistication that you've been sort of like bringing the consumer along the entire time, all of a sudden there's a break in that. And that's what brand consistency is all about. You don't want to be, designers take a look at things, and if it's really small, a good creative director will say that's too small, you can't read it, so it needs to be bigger. But we make it, that's a big joke in the ad, the ad
Yeah.
business, the design business is like the logo does not need to be any bigger.
Good stuff. I love that. That's a really good hate to tell you, but all right, but pal, let's do a quick wrap on this stuff. I would love for you to share with the audience how people can get in touch with you if they have some creative projects. Naturally, of course, I invite everybody to contact me. I can put you in touch with Scott. We work closely together on some projects. But Scott, how can people reach out to you directly and learn more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So from the agency side, you can check out our website, which is bartleyanddick.com, Bartley, the letter N like Nancy, Dick.com. That's the agency that I I own 50% of. And then if you want to check me out, I also do some consulting on the side. I do some freelance work as well. If it's something that's not meant for the agency, it's like a little bit of a smaller project. You can check out Scott Bartley, SCOTTBARTLEY dash creative.com. And that's my personal website. So either one of those two you can reach out to and check out some
Fantastic.
projects. Yeah.
Excellent. All right, everybody. Listen, this is what I need you to remember. Strong concept, right? The foundation for any meaningful design. Give me an unexpected execution. How how are you going to throw that twist into the mix to make me to connect with me? And finally, how do you pay attention to detail so that way you're making sure that you're always on point? Scott Bartley, good to talk to you, man. Until we talk again, which hopefully will be soon.
This was awesome, man.
In
Thanks
the,
for having me.
yeah, of course. In the meantime, hey everybody, tell your friends, give us a thumbs up, give us a like. Morning Sam, Morning Ralph. This is all about B2B, restaurant technology, and competing in a friendly way. So thanks, everybody. Morning Sam, Morning Ralph, clocking out. Take it easy, Scotty.
Thanks, man.